Hello, friends. As you watch this, it should be, supposing nothing crazy prevented me from editing this on time, September. I'm filming this at the end of August, and we're supposed to get a cold front today, so I am hyped. I have always been an autumnal girl. And is it just me, or is like something about social media making like autumn like the hot season? A lot of the vloggers that I follow have been starting their autumn content, like autumn's coming, like at the beginning of August, and I'm like, guys, you're still a ways away. But I get it. I can't wait for autumn. However, I cannot make autumn content in August. I'm sorry. It's too far away. Technically, we still have 3 weeks of summer, but it looks like we are getting some nice, cooler, cozier weather tomorrow, and then it should sustain for the foreseeable future. Maybe fingers crossed, September will be a nice, mild month, and that is the perfect time to start a cozy reading challenge. Now, this is where I mess with the algorithms of my channel because that's what I do. I do like half of what YouTube wants me to do, and then I go off track and I confuse the algorithms. But for a while now, I have been wanting to do a reread of all of Ella Montgomery's novels. When I was like 10 or 11, somewhere I have the specific diary entry that would tell me exactly the age I was. But around that time, my Aunt Lynn and Uncle Brian gave me for Christmas a box set of the Emily novels by Ella Montgomery. This is the first one, and as you can see, it is totally trashed. The spine is falling apart. The cover is falling apart. There's like various mystery stains all over the pages. I read this book so many times. It has been my favorite novel my entire life because Emily, I mean, just look at this cover. Okay, Emily is sitting in a window with a notepad. She's writing, and she has a cat trying to climb onto her lap, and she has long dark braids. And as soon as I saw this cover, I fiercely identified with it. This has been me my entire life, except sometimes I've had a bob, but other than that. And as I read the book, yeah, Emily, I identified with her so much. She was absolutely devoted to writing throughout her life. Spoiler alert, she does sell a novel in the course of the trilogy. And she's kind of like a moody, broody kid, which I was definitely kind of a moody, broody kid. So Emily was like, I had also read Anne of Green Gables, like every girl of the 90s, because there were those Anne of Green Gables movies with Megan Follows. Everybody watched those.
Carrot. I do look like carrots. How dare you!
Every girl read Anne of Green Gables. But I didn't connect with Anne as much because she was kind of more of a sunshiny, ever optimistic type of character, and I was more of a broody, anxiety-ridden child. So yeah, I was an Emily kid. And that was about all I read of Ella Montgomery until like my late teens, early 20s. I went on like an Ella Montgomery kick because my Aunt Kathy had gotten her diaries and she loaned them to us. And I was really obsessed with the diaries, and I decided I was going to read all of her novels. The only ones that I didn't read was Magic for Marigold. I never got a copy of that one until later. And I did not make it through all of the Anne books. I think I didn't read Rainbow Valley. And then I think I did read Rilla of Ingleside because people said that one was really good. I don't remember them very well. I just remember I was getting kind of burned out on Anne. So since it's been over 20 years at this point, I've been thinking that it would be a great time to revisit all of Ella Montgomery's novels. And particularly as we're getting into the fall, and it seems like such a nice time to read some like cozy books set in Canada. My first thought was to do all of this in 1 month because that would be like a good clickbait. Like, I read all of Ella Montgomery's novels in 1 month. Here's how I rank them or something like that. But then I thought, there's 20 of them and I probably can't read like a novel almost every day. Also, when I asked if some of you wanted to join me, quite a few of you said that you did. I know that that is going to be a tall ask for all of you as well. A couple of you said it would be great if we read one a month, and that would be fun, but it would be 20 months of Ellen Montgomery novels. They're not very long. Like, I'd have to make a video about each single book. I have a lot of stuff I want to get to, so I don't want to read them all in 20 months. That's, if anything else, I've actually been really excited to reread them, and I don't want to stretch it out over 20 months. So my thought is 100 days. That sounds like a good challenge length, and it pretty much brings us into like right before the holiday season really gets going. So it seems like a good time frame, and that's 5 days to read each novel. Most of them are not very long. You're probably looking at 50 pages or less per day if you want to keep up, which I think is doable if you're really committed to it, even if you have a day job or something. Not that I'm expecting anyone to do this with me. I was thinking of it less as like a read-along and more as just like, I will tell you my thoughts on all of the Ellen Montgomery novels, and if you have already read them, you can compare your thoughts to mine, and if you haven't read them, this will give you an idea of which ones you might want to read or skip, and I'll give you some background all along the way about Ellen Montgomery's life and like the context of when in her life she wrote all the novels, because the other thing is I want to read them in order, which I did not do the first time. I want to get a better sense of how her writing evolved, and I want to place them more in context of her life. So yeah, if you want to join me in this read along or even part of it, that would be awesome. My Discord book club is reading Anne of Green Gables as like the novel of the month, but I'm going to read it in 5 days. Okay, so let me give you a little like overview background of the life and works of Ellen Montgomery. As most of you probably know, Lucy Maud Montgomery was a Canadian author who is strongly associated with Prince Edward Island, although she lived in a number of different places in Canada throughout her life. But it is because of her that Prince Edward Island is a tourist destination to this day. You know you did something powerful with your writing when you actually ruin your favorite place by having a mini golf course open. I don't know, but that's like goals. I'm going to refer to her as Maud from here on out because that is what she is known as, and hopefully her spirit won't mind if we talk a little informally. I realized as I was initially like jotting down notes for this video that my phone does not know the name Maud, and it kept writing it down as in like the British fashion Maud. So if anyone's thinking of naming their baby Maud, know that that will be very annoying for them. So basically all of Maud's novels are about girls, or in a couple cases young women, living in Canada. They generally have a love of nature, and they tend to be imaginative, obviously sharing qualities that Maud herself possessed. And they are also always surrounded by a close-knit community of fascinating, sometimes delightful, sometimes somewhat irritating people. Very small town vibe. I have always felt that she is kind of like the juvenile version of Jane Austen as far as how well she's able to describe women's lives, or in this case mostly girls' lives, in like this domestic sphere, capturing all the little interactions between particularly women in these communities of the mostly early 20th, although she grew up in the early or the late 19th century, so I'm sure she was pulling a lot from her childhood. And she's also one of the best authors at invoking a sense of place. Maud had such a love of nature, and it comes across so strongly in her books, just the absolute love that her heroines have for trees and lakes and oceans and views and even their houses, but like especially the natural world. A lot of her characters have a tendency to give names to trees. There's a sort of like almost witchiness in how nature is revered in her books, even though they're also in these very, you know, sometimes a little uptight, very church-going communities. Gosh, my speaker is messing up my blouse and dragging it down. I found this blouse at a thrift store, and I felt like it had such a like Edwardian kind of vibe to it. Like, you can see it has like the kind of droopy bosom of the Edwardian era, along with all this lace. Very unique. So that's my themed outfit for this video. I have a number of themed outfits for future videos that I want it to be a little cooler, including a dress that I think is from 1908. And I will talk about that more in a future video. But yeah, I'm going to pull out my contemporaneous Ellen Montgomery character dress. Ellen Montgomery's books have been comfort reads for many people over a century now because of all these wonderful qualities of the imaginative heroines, the nature, the wonderful side characters. But in real life, Maud had kind of a pretty tragic life. When I finally got to the last volume of her diaries, and really the later volumes of her diaries, it's probably the most difficult thing that I have read in my life. My family on my dad's side especially has had a lot of like history of like depression, anxiety, bipolar, all kinds of like mental health issues, and I identified with a lot of what Maud was going through because she was clearly dealing with a lot of mental issues as well as her husband, and she was just so good at writing about her grief and her anguish that as you read her diaries, sometimes it's too much. And I don't know if I will ever read her diaries again because they were just so difficult. And they have since released unabridged versions of her diaries, and I read the abridged version, but I'm just like, I don't know if I can handle another go through of the diaries. Of course, it is hard to know if you're ever been inclined to write and you've ever kept a diary or journaled or anything. You will know that it's hard to know exactly how much you can judge from that type of writing, because sometimes you use the page to dump out all the worst things in your head and process them, and to take more joy and pleasure in your life because you've just gotten it out of your head. But she did clearly seem to intend for her diaries to be shared. If I remember correctly, and I did not double check this, but I think she like recopied them all, so she might have taken out some parts, but like she intended people to see them and read them and keep them later, which is interesting. So many of these writers burned their journals and letters, so I'm kind of curious why she really wanted to share a lot of really intimate thoughts. And I also hesitate to speculate whether they were representative of her mental state at all times. But as the years go by in the diaries, it does become more and more clear that like she's not just dumping like a bad moment, but that she is really suffering. It's also unknown whether her death was a suicide or an accidental overdose, but either way, she was on some medication for her mental state, and it is believed that she died from taking too much of it, so that's another unknown. Another thing that really broke my heart about her diaries is that she was cursed, you might say, with a life that was long enough to enjoy a lot of success, and also to see her work start to sort of fall out of fashion and favor. But she didn't live long enough to see it be revived and see how enduring it would be. Maud's mother died when she was not yet 2 years old, and her father basically left her behind to be raised by her grandparents while he went out west and did some stuff out there, was working or something, I don't quite remember. But so a lot of her books tend to be about orphan girls, and there's often kind of a strict but ultimately lovable woman who kind of takes the heroine in and raises her, and I'm sure that this has to be rather autobiographical. Maud must have felt rather like an orphan who was taken care of by her grandparents rather than her parents. Her childhood was rather lonely, so she spent a lot of time with her imagination and in nature, which is also reflected in her novels. She went to college and became a teacher, but I got the sense that she didn't enjoy that tremendously. Not like she enjoyed writing, certainly. And who could blame her? I get the feeling with a lot of women's writing of this time that although being a teacher was one of the first jobs that women were widely accepted in as single women, having some independence, that they still didn't have, like, they often end up boarding with a local family. They weren't paid very well. It must have felt like a halfway sort of independence to them. And it's probably no wonder that when women were getting like factory jobs and secretary jobs and they could have their own apartments or live in boarding houses, they must have been like, yeah. She was a prolific short story writer before she even wrote her novels, and also just throughout her career. There are also many volumes of her short stories available, which we're not going to get into. Some of them are quite good, though, and some of them are quite not. And she was 34 years old in 1908 when her first novel, Anne of Green Gables, was published. Of course, became her most successful novel and remains her most successful novel to this day. And one thing I will say about her novels is that they often have a romantic plotline, but a lot of times it's not like the most satisfying. And in her real life, her love life, ooh, what a mess. She kept getting proposals from men that just sounded terrible for her. And at one point she fell in love with this guy, Herman, who she was obviously like very lusty for, but it sounds like she felt like he was kind of beneath her class-wise. And then I think he died like not that long after she broke off the affair anyway. So that probably wouldn't have worked. She finally married in 1911, and having read her diaries, just the thought of like thinking about her initially marrying this guy gives me a sense of impending dread, because this marriage just, I don't think it was good for her. She obviously was prone to melancholy, shall we say, and he sounds like he was just as bad, if not worse, as her. It can be a difficult match when both people are prone to depression. And it also must have just been very hard to be a woman who was publishing novels and had a successful career as a writer back in that time, when I don't think that her husband really cared or supported her in any way, which was probably typical of most men she would have met. But it is too bad she couldn't have found someone who was a better match for her in that regard. She had 2 sons, and her son Chester also just caused her a world of grief. And she had a protracted legal battle with her first publisher, the one who published Anne of Green Gables and Anne of Avonlea. They denied her some of her royalties, and she just had all the stress of these legal battles. So that's unpleasant. But the parts of her diary that hit me the absolute hardest was her 2 outpourings of grief when her best friend and cousin Freed died of the Spanish flu, and she writes this long, beautiful, super anguished tribute to this person that she loved so much. And then she also had a very beloved cat, Lucky, and when Luck died, I am not sure that there is a more devastating memorial to a cat in the English language, or maybe any language. Like, I was just sobbing reading this. She loves this cat so much. It's like many pages all about how much she loved this cat. It just, ugh. She was really good at capturing grief and pain and sorrow, and I think that's one reason that her novels have resonated over such a long period of time, is that the emotions in her books are very raw. They weren't cloaked in any kind of sentimental veneer like a lot of novels still were at that time. They just come across as very honest. And they tend to be thought of as like these kind of cozy cottagecore girly reads, and like they are. She put more of like the happier side of herself in her books, which I definitely identify with myself, when writing is just like the happy place that you can go to. But there's like that underlying layer that hints at the darker side of life, that gives it a richness that I always really connected to, and probably took more comfort in them because they didn't try to be like overly happy or overly cute or anything like that. I also feel like her books really kind of like convey tools for coping with depression and grief in the way that she talks about imagination and nature. She also kind of shows through her heroines how you can use nature and creativity to cope with the darker parts of life, and I really took that to heart as a kid, and I still do to this day. So here are all her novels in order. Here's the schedule. So in September, I'm gonna read Anne of Green Gables, Anne of Avonlea, Kilmeny of the Orchard, The Story Girl, The Golden Road, and Anne of the Island. Kilmeny of the Orchard, if I recall, is a standalone, kind of like a romance between two young adults. And I remember it as being a very weak point in her catalog, like something she seemed like she was more writing to the tastes of the time than her authentic self. And then The Story Girl and the Golden Road, that is a duo of books. The Story Girl and the Golden Road are a duology with the same characters. And I think I remember that Maud's favorite heroine of hers was the Story Girl character, but I will look that up and give you accurate information when I read it. Okay, so that's September. In October, we will read Anne's House of Dreams, Rainbow Valley, Rilla of Ingleside, and the 3 Emily novels, Emily of New Moon, Emily Climbs, and Emily's Quest. What a perfect time to have Emily slot in there right before Halloween, because I think her books are the most kind of spooky season. In November, we will read The Blue Castle. Oh, no, wait, I'm sorry. The Blue Castle is actually before Emily's Quest. So The Blue Castle will be October. November will kick off with Emily's Quest. Then Magic for Marigold, A Tangled Web, Pat of Silver Bush, Mistress Pat, and Anne of Windy Poplars. Okay, maybe I didn't read Anne of Windy Poplars either, because I didn't realize that actually comes after Rilla of Ingleside. I don't think I read Rainbow Valley or Anne of Windy Poplars, so there's actually going to be a few here that I've never read. Pat of Silver Bush and Mistress Pat are another duology, and The Blue Castle and A Tangled Web are her other adult novels. And then in December, we will end it with Jane of Lantern Hill and Anne of Ingleside. Okay, I see. So the Anne books in the box are in a different order than when she wrote them. So yeah, I think I actually did read all these. I just didn't read Rainbow Valley. But you know what? I don't remember. It's all gonna feel new to me. I barely remember any of this stuff except for Emily, because I've read those so many times. But even then, it's been a while. A lot of her books are over 100 years old, so you can get them for free. They're, not under copyright protection anymore. So if you want to read along, it should be extremely easy to do so because the books are widely available. And then I also wanted to touch upon the fact that these books are anywhere from 90 to over 100 years old. So there are going to be some things in them, and I don't even necessarily remember all of them because the last time I read them was like the year 2001 or something, and people back then just were not as critical of their reading material as far as like whether it offends or upsets anybody. And that includes me, just like anyone else. I would just read things without really deeply analyzing whether anything was problematic. So I can't even tell you what you might encounter. But I do know that Maud did tend to be rather classist, as was typical for her time. And of course, she was somewhat racist against the native population. She was very classist about the French, which I have some French-Canadian background myself, so and there's also a rather uncomfortable relationship in the Emily books where one of her father's old friends is obviously courting her when she's like a kid. And yeah, that at the time that I read it as a kid, I didn't even really think about it very much, except just kind of like, he turns out to be a jerk. But like as the years went by, it started to look creepier. The attitude toward older men and like younger women was obviously extremely different back then, because you see this kind of vibe in quite a few books, and in fact sometimes it ends in happily ever after. But I will say that in the Emily books, spoiler alert, it does not, but it's squicky. So we'll talk about that a little when we get to the Emily books. And if there's things like that in the other novels, I don't even know because I haven't read them in so long. But I just wanted to let you know, whenever you read older books, you might encounter things that are uncomfortable to modern readers. And of course, this is my plan, but life has thrown me some curveballs this year, so it's possible that I could fall off track. It might end up taking more than 100 days. I set that time frame because it seemed reasonable, but one thing that I've learned this year is that I need to just let go of things when I'm not feeling well, or something comes up, this is just not a time to push myself. As some of you know, I've been dealing with some perimenopause symptoms, especially mentally, like a lot of just kind of fatigue and like this weird kind of like apathetic, disconnected feeling that I've had to kind of battle against throughout, especially this summer. And I'm not gonna knock myself out, but this is the plan. And I feel like it's gonna be a really nice way to spend the fall. I love discussing the works of a writer especially when I know a fair bit about their actual life, and it'll just be really fun to look at these novels in the context of being in order and looking at them a little more critically than I did the first time that I read them, getting into a little analysis. I'll also be curious to see like if certain books hit me differently now. Like when I was younger, probably around the same time, I read Little Women. I know I read Little Women as like a kid and I did not like it, and then I read it like probably in my late teens and I liked it a little better, but I still didn't love it. And then I read it again recently, and this time I really did love it. The preachiness of Little Women really stood out to me when I was younger, but having more context about like the 1860s and the Transcendentalists and just being older myself, the preachiness didn't bother me as much. It just kind of was like, well, that's just kind of like how they knew to communicate ideas back then. And I found myself actually really appreciating Marmee's wisdom. Like as I get older, it's like I needed a Marmee a little more than when I was a kid. So it's interesting to go back and read a book that as a kid, like maybe you didn't totally love it, and see if as an adult it kind of strikes you in a different way. Like maybe Anne's sunshininess, will I like it better this time? Will I enjoy the Anne books more? We'll see. It'll be interesting. So yeah, be sure to, at the very least, subscribe to my free Patreon tier or Substack. Same content on both. If you like this video and you enjoyed spending a little time with me and you want to stick around, be sure to subscribe. Usually I talk about the creative life, particularly as a full-time writer. I talk about the practical side, fantasy world building, the emotional side, the financial side, blah-de-blah. And sometimes I talk about books and other stuff that I like to nerd out about. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Lydia Foxglove, and I will be back soon with more on L.M. Montgomery. Bye!